Memphis, Tennessee, December 1851. Rain hammered the wooden boards of the riverfront auction block, turning the packed earth below into a treacherous, sucking mud. The Mississippi rolled past in a broad gray ribbon, its surface broken by sleet and drifting timber. Under a sagging canvas awning, men stood with collars turned up and hats pulled low, trying to keep their ledgers dry while human beings shivered on display dot in a city accustomed to spectacle and cruelty. Nothing about that. Afternoon should have been remarkable. Slaves were bought and sold by the dozens every week. Children were separated from mothers. Husbands were weighed like livestock, inspected, priced, and dispatched to distant plantations. So much misery had passed through Memphis that it might have seemed no single sale could matter. But on that sodden December day, one transaction occurred that would haunt the city's commercial elite for decades. It began, as such things often did, with a rumor. Memphis in 1851 was drunk on its own prosperity. Cotton warehouses along the river bulged with bales bound for northern mills and European ports. Steamboats churned up and down the Mississippi, their whistles screaming over the water as they brought in merchants, gamblers, preachers, and slave traders from every direction. The city had recently surpassed Louisville in cotton exports, and its men congratulated one another in clubrooms thick with cigar smoke, certain they were living at the beating heart of progress. Along Front Street, auction houses rose like temples to that belief. White columns gleamed in the southern sun on clear days. Gas lamps flickered in their cavernous interiors when weather turned foul. Inside, the same mechanized chant echoed day after day. Names, ages, prices, bids. Human bodies shuffled, hands trembled, eyes went dull. Among the Memphis elite, 3 families sat above the rest, like stones at the apex of a great pyramid. Harringtons controlled the largest cotton warehouses on the riverfront. Their patriarch, Edmund Harrington, had drifted west from Virginia with the practiced air of a man who expected the world to oblige him. Through a mixture of strategic marriages and ruthless business decisions, he had bankrupted rivals and secured lucrative contracts. His warehouses were known to be orderly, efficient, and merciless. His only son, Charles, 32 and carefully handsome, served as the public face of the family. He wore his privilege like a tailored coat, never loud, always evident. His clothes were impeccably cut, his boots polished, his smile practiced. He moved through drawing rooms and counting houses with the effortless confidence of someone who had never once been told no in any way that mattered. The Daltons, by contrast, had clawed their way upward. Jacob Dalton arrived in Memphis with little more than a sharp mind and iron will, where the Harringtons dealt in cotton, Dalton dealt in flesh. He became the city's premier slave broker, the man who could find you anyone, from a strong field hand to a French-speaking housemaid. His reputation for discretion made his services indispensable to those who didn't want certain purchases recorded in official ledgers. Then there were the Cavendishes, who brought old Charleston money and East Coast connections to bear on this raw river town. Richard Cavendish had relocated to Memphis in 1847, bringing with him capital, a web of shipping interests in New Orleans, and banking ties in New York. His wife, Victoria, presided over elegant salons where business deals were sealed over-imported. Wine and gossip moved faster than river water. On the surface, the 3 families existed in a state of polished civility. Their daughters attended one another's parties. Their sons played cards at the same club. Their names appeared side by side in church subscription lists and charity announcements. Beneath that veneer, rivalry simmered like a fever. Each family watched the others for signs of weakness, scanning every investment and acquisition for advantage. Each clung to the conviction that the right deal, the right risk, might cement their dominance over Memphis for a generation. It was into this atmosphere of ambition and suspicion that the first whispers arrived. The rumor began quietly and early. November shared over cards and bourbon in the dim corners of gentlemen's clubs. A slave trader named Ambrose Fletcher, men said, had come to Memphis with a piece of special merchandise. Fletcher's name carried weight among traders, though not the kind that inspired affection. He worked alone, kept to the edges of the trade, and avoided the established auction houses, where most traffickers boasted about how many bodies they could move in a month. Fletcher specialized in rarity. He dealt in specialty slaves, people with unusual skills, striking appearances, or attributes that appealed to particular, often secretive buyers in a business built on display. Fletcher's silence made him memorable. He arrived quietly, took modest rooms in a boarding house on Madison Avenue rather than at the grand hotels, and did not register lots at any public auction. He conducted no open sales. He showed nothing. He spoke to no one about the merchandise. He'd brought Dot, and that in a city that thrived on spectacle was what made people talk. Men in velvet-backed chairs at the Memphis club lowered their voices as the story passed from table to table. They spoke of a slave not merely handsome, but possessed of a beauty so striking that even seasoned traders stumbled over words trying to describe him. They spoke of marble-cut features and eyes that seemed too intelligent, of a bearing more suited to a drawing room than an auction block. Some called the story nonsense. Others listened a little too closely. One night, during a particularly slow card game, Charles Harrington heard the rumor directly. Across the table sat William Drexler, a tobacco merchant whose business frequently intersected with the slave trade. Drexler was not given to dramatic flourishes. He preferred numbers to stories. "I saw him," Drexler said, almost reluctantly, as he studied his hand, "down near the riverfront. Fletcher was walking him along like he had a prince on a chain." "What, you lost your appetite for counting bales?" another man joked. Drexler ignored the laughter. "I've been in this business 20 years. I've seen thousands upon thousands. Nothing prepared me for what I saw that afternoon." Charles arched an eyebrow. "Surely you exaggerate, Drexler. Beauty is hardly a rarity in the slave markets." "It wasn't just the face," Drexler replied, voice dropping. "It was the way he moved, the way he carried himself, even in chains. Like he knew something we didn't, like he was indulging us." Charles chuckled and laid a card on the table, but the description lodged itself in his mind. His father had recently complained that none of their house staff possessed the refinement appropriate to their status. A slave of exceptional appearance, properly trained, could serve as a living ornament, a conversation piece, a visible testament to the Harrington family's reach. And if this man was truly as extraordinary as Drexler claimed. Later that week, Charles made discreet inquiries. The information that returned was simple and startling. Fletcher was preparing to leave Memphis within days, having found no suitable buyer. The price he demanded for his special merchandise was $3,000. Charles almost laughed when he first heard the number, 3,000. A prime field hand rarely sold for more than 1,500. A skilled house servant, educated and well-behaved, might fetch 2,000. 3,000 suggested either insanity or something genuinely unique. Curiosity, pride, and the quiet press of family expectations finally overcame his skepticism. On a gray afternoon in late November, with rain threatening over the river, Charles Harrington requested a private viewing. The boarding house on Madison Avenue smelled of damp plaster, coal smoke, and the faint sourness of too many strangers passing through its narrow hallways. Fletcher received Charles in a cramped upstairs room furnished with a bed, a washstand, and a single chair. The trader was thinner than Charles expected, with weathered skin and eyes that missed nothing. "I appreciate your discretion, Mr. Harrington," Fletcher said, gesturing to the lone chair. "Your inquiry came through respectable channels. That speaks well of you." "I'm told you have something unusual," Charles replied, remaining standing. "I'm here to determine whether the rumors justify the price you're asking." "The price," Fletcher said, "is non-negotiable. 3,000, gold or bank draft, no installments, no promises of future favors, payable in full at once. And I am to take your word that this investment warrants such confidence?" Fletcher smiled thinly. "You'll see. He crossed the room and knocked 3 times on the door to the adjoining chamber. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the latch turned and the door opened. The man who stepped into the dim light did not need introduction. He was perhaps 6 feet tall, slender but well-proportioned, with a posture that suggested music rather than manual labor. His skin was the color of honey warmed by sun, a shade that hinted at mixed ancestry. That, in itself, was not unusual. What was unusual was the way every feature seemed to align with a kind of ruthless symmetry. High cheekbones, strong jaw, straight nose. His eyes were a gray-green that shifted in the lamplight, clear and sharp as river glass Doc Charles had seen. Handsome men before. But there was something else here, some intangible quality that made the air in the room feel suddenly thinner. The young man wore simple cotton trousers and a white shirt, both clean but worn. No chains, Charles noted, no iron at the wrists or ankles. No visible marks of restraint. He stood quietly, hands clasped loosely before him, gaze lowered in the expected posture of submission. Yet nothing about him felt truly submissive, it was. As if he were playing a role he had long ago mastered. His name is Marcus, Fletcher said quietly. 23 years old, born in Virginia. Educated, though I am not at liberty to discuss the particulars. He reads and writes in English and French. Trained in household management, bookkeeping, and music. He has never worked in the fields. His health is excellent. His skin is unmarked. Charles circled him slowly, as one might walk around a sculpture at a gallery. Marcus did not move, but Charles could feel the man's awareness tracking his every step. Let me see your hands. Charles said. Marcus raised his palms without hesitation. Long fingers, uncalloused, nails neatly trimmed. Not the hands of a laborer. The hands of someone who had handled paper, ink, instruments. Look at me. Charles ordered. Marcus lifted his gaze. For an instant, something like recognition jolted. Through Charles, a strange and irrational feeling, as if he had walked into a room expecting a mirror and found another person instead. The eyes that met his were unmistakably intelligent. But there was more than cleverness there. Weariness, perhaps. Calculation? A quiet, smoldering anger banked so far down it barely showed. Except in the tightness around the mouth, for one fleeting second, Charles had the unsettling impression that he was being evaluated. He broke the gaze first. Why hasn't he sold? Charles asked Fletcher, forcing his tone back to business. If he's everything you claim, why are you still in Memphis? Someone should have bought him the moment you arrived. The men in this city lack vision, Fletcher replied. They see a pretty face and assume I've been keeping him as a pleasure slave. They assume he is compromised. They are wrong. But their prejudice has worked in your favor. You have an opportunity others were too foolish to recognize. What's his history? Charles asked. I won't buy a mystery, nor how handsome it is. His history is complicated, Fletcher said. He was raised in a household that valued education. Employed as a personal secretary, the family fell into financial difficulty and liquidated certain assets. I acquired him legitimately, with proper documentation. Everything is legal and transferable. Something in his tone made it clear that further questions would not be welcome. Charles considered pressing anyway, but behind his eyes, he was already imagining Marcus in the Harrington house pouring wine at dinners, taking dictation in his father's study, moving through rooms full of envious guests. He thought of the Dalton twins, those exotic sisters that Jacob Dalton flaunted at his gatherings. Of the Cavendish's pianist slave, who played genteel waltzes at Victoria's salons. This would eclipse all of that. A male slave of such striking appearance, clearly educated, obviously refined. It would make the Harringtons the talk of Memphis. I'll require documentation, Charles said at last. Proof of ownership, the bill of sale, transfer papers, everything in proper order. Of course, Fletcher replied smoothly. Everything is prepared. He paused, then added, the only question, Mr. Harrington, is whether you are prepared to meet my price. Charles glanced again at Marcus, who had lowered his gaze to the floor once more, his posture unchanged. Yet tension seemed to vibrate beneath the stillness, like a wire drawn too tight. What thoughts moved behind those gray-green eyes? What did this man think of being inspected like livestock? The questions unsettled Charles. He is not a man given to wondering about the inner lives of slaves. Yet here in this damp, lamplit room, his carefully ordered world shifted just a fraction. 3,000, he said. I'll have the bank draft prepared. We'll complete the transaction tomorrow at my attorney's office. Fletcher's? Mouth curved in the ghost of a smile. Tomorrow, 2:00. Bring the draft. I'll bring the papers. You've made an excellent decision, Mr. Harrington. As Charles stepped back out into the cold afternoon, the sky over Memphis had turned. A flat, oppressive gray. He pulled his coat tighter and began the walk toward the better part of town. Boots slick on wet cobblestones. He had just committed to the largest single purchase of his life without consulting his father. Edmund Harrington would be furious. For a moment, Charles almost turned back. But the image of Marcus standing unchained, composed, impossible to ignore rose in his mind like a challenge. His father's anger, he decided, would not last. Not once Edmund saw the young man himself. Not once he understood the social advantage such an acquisition would bring. Charles quickened his pace. He did not know. As the rain began to fall, that he had just set in motion a chain of events that would shatter 3 of Memphis's wealthiest families, nor could he imagine that the man he had agreed to purchase for $3,000 was not, in the eyes of the law or of God, a slave at all. He was a freeborn man, illegally sold, carrying with him a secret that would prove far more dangerous than beauty. And Memphis, for all its cotton and confidence, was entirely unprepared for what was coming. The house on Union Avenue, the Harrington estate on Union Avenue, stood like a monument carved out of arrogance and old Virginia pride. 6 white columns supported the front portico, their marble smooth surfaces catching the winter light like polished bone. The house was built not to shelter a family, but to announce one. Inside, imported carpets from France softened each footstep. Crystal chandeliers flickered with gaslight. The air smelled faintly of pipe smoke, lemon polish, and the self-assuredness of a man who believed his wealth could not be touched by fate, that it was into this world that Marcus entered on a cold November evening just hours after Charles. Harrington completed the largest and most consequential purchase of his life. Edmund Harrington's shock. Edmund had been prepared to rage. Charles knew this well. His father despised being left out of any major decision, especially one involving money. And $3,000 was not merely a large sum. It was the kind of expenditure that demanded explanation, justification, and ritual humiliation. Afterward, but when Marcus was led into the main parlor, something strange happened. Edmund's anger evaporated. The patriarch rose from his high-backed chair as if pulled upward by a string. He circled Marcus slowly, eyes narrowed in calculation, admiration, and though he'd never admit it, something close to unease. "My God," he murmured. "Charles, you may have shown more sense than I've credited you with in years." Charles felt pride surge in his chest. "He's educated, refined, reads French. I thought he could serve as your personal secretary." "Secretary," Edmund repeated, inspecting Marcus like a fine instrument. "He may do far more than that." Then, turning to Marcus, Edmund asked, "Can you read legal documents? Contracts, financial ledgers?" Marcus bowed his head slightly. "Yes, sir. I have done so before." "We will test that tomorrow," Edmund said. "Charles, quarter him in the east wing, the room beside my study." The east wing. No slave had ever slept there. The servants' quarters were traditionally in the basement or in the outbuildings behind the house. To place Marcus in the east wing mere feet from Edmund's study and down the hall from Charles' own room shattered every rule of hierarchy. The household had lived by and the staff noticed whispers Velostersch. Harrington household was Run by Bess, a housekeeper whose sharp eyes and sharper tongue had maintained order for 20 years. She confronted Charles the moment Marcus stepped away. "It ain't proper," she said flatly. "Putting him in the East Wing like he's family. He's not like the others," Charles replied. "My father wants him nearby." "That's exactly what's got the others scared," Bess said, lowering her voice. "There's something different about him. Ain't right how quiet he is. How he looks at things. Like he already knows." Charles brushed off her concern, but the truth was he felt it too. Marcus unsettled the household without raising his voice. Without breaking a rule, without saying more than a handful of carefully measured words, even in silence, he occupied space differently than any slave Charles had ever seen. The perfect servant. Within days, Marcus had mastered Edmund's schedule, reorganized years of chaotic correspondence, and taken complete command of the study. He anticipated Edmund's needs before they were voiced. When visitors arrived, he greeted them with a composed dignity more suited to a trained valet of a Charleston aristocrat. During dinner parties, he served wine with perfect posture and effortless grace. Conversations faltered when he passed. Women whispered. Men stared too long. And rumors began to spread. "Where did you find him?" Mrs. Sarah Dalton asked during a dinner 2 weeks later, unable to keep her eyes away. "A fortunate acquisition," Edmund replied proudly. "One must know where to look for quality." Across the table, Victoria Cavendish watched Marcus with narrowed eyes. "He has the bearing of a gentleman," she observed. "If he were properly dressed, one might mistake him for a guest." "Appearances can be cultivated," Edmund said smoothly. "With the right training, even a slave can mimic refinement." But Edmund wasn't entirely convinced by his own words. Marcus's refinement did not feel rehearsed. It felt innate, and that troubled him that no ordinary property by December's first frost. Marcus had become a fixture of life in the Harrington home. Yet the man himself remained a mystery. Charles found excuses to speak to him, small conversational tests to understand who Marcus had been before Fletcher brought him to Memphis. Marcus answered politely, but never deeply. One afternoon, Charles caught him reading a French novel in his room. "Where did you learn French?" he asked. Marcus closed the book carefully. "My previous employer valued languages." "That's not common for slave owners. My situation was unusual." "In what way?" Marcus hesitated, a flicker of pain, anger, or memory passing across his face before he masked it again. "Some things are better left in the past, Mr. Harrington." Charles was not satisfied, and that dissatisfaction grew into fascination dangerous. Persistent fascination, unease among the enslaved. The other slaves kept their distance from Marcus, uncertain of what to make of him. He was one of them, and yet not. Bess confided to the cook. "He watches everything. Sees more'n he lets on. I swear sometimes he looks at Mr. Edmund or Mr. Charles like he's measuring them. Like he's waiting. For what?" "Judith whispered. "Something we won't like." They were more correct than they knew. The unexpected visitor on a bitter night in early January. Long after the house had fallen quiet, the Harrington estate received an unexpected visitor. Jacob Dalton. He arrived pale, agitated, and refused brandy, something unheard of for him. Edmund ushered him into the study. Dalton didn't sit, didn't breathe, didn't even blink. "I want to buy your new slave," he said bluntly. "Marcus, name your price." Edmund stiffened. "He's not for sale." "I'll pay you $5,000. Charles, listening outside the study, felt his heartbeat stop. 5,000. "That's absurd," Edmund said. "Why would you—" 6,000, Dalton cut in. "Final offer." "Jacob," Edmund said slowly, "why would you pay such a price?" Dalton's voice dropped. "Because you don't know what you've brought into your home. Marcus is no ordinary slave. And if you knew what I know, you'd sell him before dawn?" Charles swallowed hard. The room turned cold around him. Dalton leaned closer to Edmund and whispered the words that would crack open the first fault line in their world. "Marcus is not who you think he is. And what he represents could destroy you all." The first cracks in the facade, the fire in Edmund Harrington's study, snapped sharply as Jacob Dalton's words settled into the room like smoke thick. Choking and impossible to ignore. Destroy us. Edmund repeated. Jacob, what are you talking about? Dalton ran a trembling hand through his hair. His usually composed face carried a wildness Charles had never seen. He looked like a man haunted not by ghosts, but by truths he wished he'd never learned. You bought something you don't understand, Dalton said. Someone. Charles stepped closer to the door, breath held. Dalton lowered his voice. Ambrose Fletcher didn't deal in normal trade. You know that. He dealt in special merchandise. I'm aware of Fletcher's reputation, Edmund said, but that doesn't explain your obsession with Marcus. Dalton's eyes flashed. It's not obsession. It's survival. Whispers from Virginia Dalton finally sank into a chair, leaning forward with the look of a man defeated. I've been investigating Fletcher, he said. Not long ago I learned something in Richmond. Something that changes everything. Charles's hand froze on the doorknob. Marcus had said he was from Virginia. But always vaguely, always carefully, Dalton continued. There is a family in Virginia, a wealthy one, the Thorntons. 2 years ago, their eldest son disappeared. The family claimed he ran away, but no one believed them. The boy was educated, cultured, too refined to vanish without reason. Edmund frowned. And you think Marcus is this missing son? I think Fletcher stole him, Dalton said. Or someone close to the family sold him in secret. Either way, Marcus was freeborn. Edmund, a free man illegally enslaved. The words hit the room like broken glass. Charles felt cold spread across his chest. Freeborn. A free man. Bought like property. A crime so severe that even wealthy men whispered about the consequences. Edmund's face drained of color. If that's true, then the papers Fletcher gave me. Forged, Dalton said. Fletcher did it before? I have records, names, cases, he covered up. If anyone discovers you possess a freeborn man. Edmund closed his eyes. The consequences were unthinkable. Prison, ruined fortune, destroyed reputation, and worse, Memphis society would devour them. Like wolves. A father's panic. Edmund regained himself with effort. This rumor can't be trusted. You have no proof. None. Dalton hesitated. No direct proof. But enough. Whispers to terrify any sane man. And there's more. He lowered his voice further. Richard Cavendish knows. Edmund stiffened. Cavendish? How? Dalton swallowed. He hired me. Charles's breath caught. Dalton looked ashamed, even afraid. 3 days ago, he approached me privately. Offered me $2,000 to help him steal Marcus from your household. The room went dead silent. Steal him? Edmund said, slowly. Yes, Dalton said. And he promised 3,000 more if I delivered Marcus safely to him. That means he believes Marcus is worth at least 5,000, maybe more? Charles felt sick. Why would Cavendish pay so much? Dalton answered the unspoken question. Because he wants leverage. If Marcus truly is the Thornton boy, Cavendish could blackmail the family, extort them, ruin them. Use Marcus to drain fortunes from Virginia to New Orleans. Dalton leaned in, voice cracking. Edmund, I am telling you this because you deserve a chance to protect yourself. Sell him. Sell Marcus to me. Let me deal with the consequences. You walk away clean. Edmund stared at the fire. 3 days, he finally whispered. Give me 3 days, Jacob. Let me confirm these claims. Dalton nodded reluctantly. 3 days. But don't trust Cavendish. He's desperate, dangerous, and if he believes Marcus will slip out of Memphis, he'll act. Dalton left the house under heavy silence. The confrontation minutes later, Edmund summoned Marcus. The young man entered quietly, hands folded. Behind him, his face calm, his eyes unreadable. You called for me, sir. Edmund dismissed all pretense. Who are you really? Marcus froze for the first time since stepping into the Harrington home. Not visibly, but Charles, watching from the shadows near the doorway, felt the change. A breath held, a wall cracking. What truth do you seek, Mr. Harrington? Marcus asked softly. The truth of who I was, or the truth of who I've been forced to become? Both? The fire crackled between them. Marcus's voice, when it came, was low and steady. I was born free. In Virginia, my name is Marcus Thornton. Charles's? Hand tightened on the doorframe. Thornton. Dalton had been right. My mother educated me, Marcus continued. Prepared me for a life I never got to live. But my family fell into ruin. That's scandal. Someone, his jaw clenched, sold me to Fletcher under forged papers. Edmund's face went pale. Why did you not protest? He demanded, why didn't you tell my attorney? Why didn't you speak up? Marcus lifted his gaze, and in his eyes Charles saw for the first time the full weight of the life stolen from him. And say what? Marcus whispered. That I was free? That I had a life before chains? Who would believe a slave over forged documentation? Over a white trader? Over a Harrington? Edmund opened his mouth, closed it. Marcus was right. The system had been designed so he could never win, never escape, never be heard. The first truth, then Edmund asked the question that turned everything inside out. Who forged the papers? Who sold you? Marcus's expression, usually controlled, cracked. Just for a moment. My own family, he said bitterly. They sold me to save themselves. Charles's stomach twisted. Marcus wasn't simply a victim of the system. He had been betrayed by the people who should have protected him. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. Marcus continued. And Mr. Harrington? The danger in your house does not come from me. What do you mean? Edmund asked. Your rivals? Marcus said. Dalton. Cavendish. They know or suspect the truth. Each one wants me for a different reason. And none of those reasons will end well for you? Edmund's voice was barely a whisper. What are you suggesting? Marcus stepped forward, his shadow long against the firelight. I'm suggesting, he said, that if you wish to avoid ruin, you help me disappear. A pact of desperation. The suggestion sucked the air from the room. Charles stepped forward at last. You mean run away? I mean survive, Marcus said simply. He looked at Edmund, not as a slave looks at a master, but as one man looks at another when both stand on the edge of disaster. Help me leave. Memphis, Marcus said. Give me papers. Give me money. And you can claim ignorance. Say I escaped. Say you were deceived by Fletcher. The truth will never touch you. And what assurance do I have, Edmund whispered, that you won't destroy us later? Expose us? Marcus didn't blink. You have my word. And after all that has happened, Mr. Harrington, what else do we have left but words? Silence. Then slowly heavy with fear and necessity, Edmund nodded. 3 days, he said. In 3 days you will vanish. And the pact was sealed. A handshake between a slave and a master, yet in that moment neither was what the world believed. Then to be, but fate was already moving. Charles did not sleep that night. He lay awake listening to every sound. The wind against the shutters. The footsteps of servants, the sighs of a house burdened with too many secrets. He didn't know that as he stared into darkness, somewhere else in Memphis another man was. Also awake, Richard Cavendish, burning with desperation, plotting his next move, willing to risk everything for the one thing he believed could save him. And before the 3 days Edmund promised Marcus were over, Memphis would erupt into a storm of fire, theft, betrayal, and death. The pact would crumble. The families would shatter. And Marcus Thornton would not wait for Edmund's plan. Because someone neither Harrington nor Dalton nor Cavendish suspected was already preparing to take him first. The next 2 days in the Harrington household felt like living beside a ticking clock. Edmund moved with the tension of a man who feared every knock at the door. Charles hovered between guilt and fascination, watching Marcus with a mix of dread, admiration, and something he dared not name. Marcus himself seemed unchanged, calm, quiet, efficient as ever. But beneath that calm was something sharpened, focused, waiting, and Memphis, unaware of the fuse that had been lit. Continued its usual rhythm boats along the river, auctions along Front Street. Gentlemen smoking cigars heated with gossip. Until the night everything shifted. Cavendish in the shadows. At the same hour, Marcus was setting Edmund's documents in order and preparing accounts in the study. A very different fire burned across town. Inside the Cavendish manor, Richard Cavendish sat before a table covered with maps, letters, receipts, every fragment of information he'd managed to gather about Marcus Thornton. His burn from the warehouse fire still ached. His hands, wrapped in linen. His wife, Victoria, circled him like a hawk. "We cannot afford to lose him," she hissed. "If Marcus reaches the north, every opportunity dies with him." Richard's voice was rough. "Dalton knows too much. Harrington suspects too much. Fletcher vanished. Everything is slipping." "Then we tighten our grip," Victoria said. "We act. Now." Richard hesitated. "Harrington has guards. Household staff. He watches Marcus closely. That's why we don't take Marcus from the house," Victoria said. Her eyes gleamed with cold calculation. "We make Harrington come to us." Richard frowned. "What do you mean?" Victoria leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Every man has a weakness. Harrington's is pride. His pride. And his son." Richard froze. "You want to target Charles?" "I want to frighten him," she said. "Make them feel unsafe. Make them panic. Panic makes people careless. And careless men make mistakes." Richard nodded slowly. "Then we start tonight." The night of fire, just before midnight. A blaze erupted in the Cavendish warehouse near the riverfront. Flames shot up into the winter sky, reflected on the dark water like molten copper. Smoke billowed into the streets. The fire consumed the building too fast. The Cavendish accounting books stored inside burned first. Richard Cavendish was found inside the structure just as the roof caved in, trying desperately to salvage ledgers that to any outsider were meaningless, but to him were lifelines. He escaped alive. Barely. He was carried home with burns on his face and hands, delirious with fear and fury. The city called it an accident. But the timing was too perfect. Someone wanted the Cavendish family weakened, distracted, unable to act. Someone who understood that desperation makes men reckless. Someone who had already been moving in the shadows, long before Harrington or Dalton even realized a game was being played. 3 events. One morning. The fire was only the beginning. By dawn. 3 events collided like dominoes falling in perfect synchrony. Event 1. A death in the Dalton home. Thomas Dalton, Jacob's eldest son, was found dead in his bed. A healthy young man of 24, gone without warning. Doctors found no wounds, no poison, no explanation. Whispers spread instantly. A curse. Bad luck. Retribution. But Jacob Dalton knew the truth. No one dared say aloud. This was a message, and it terrified him. Event 2. Victoria Cavendish at the Harrington doorstep before breakfast was finished. A carriage screeched to a halt before the Harrington estate. Victoria. Cavendish stepped out, face pale but determined. When Edmund brought her to the parlor, she didn't sit. Didn't smile? "I know what you're planning," she said coldly. "You intend to help Marcus escape." Edmund went still. People talked in Memphis, but not that quickly, which meant somebody was watching his house. "My husband had your home observed," Victoria continued. "We know about the late-night conversation, the whispered plans, the preparations." Edmund's composure cracked. "Mrs. Cavendish, don't waste my time," she snapped. "Give Marcus to me. Now I will pay you $4,000 more than you paid Fletcher." Charles stiffened where he stood behind his father. $4,000. Victoria's voice lowered into something cold enough to freeze bone. Some problems can only be solved permanently. Some secrets must be cut out at the root. If Marcus reaches the north, every one of us burns. She wasn't threatening Marcus. She was threatening the Harringtons. Event 3. Marcus vanishes at the height of the argument. Charles tore into the parlor, face pale. Silence crashed through the room. "What?" Edmund croaked. "Marcus," Charles said breathlessly. "His room empty. Bed made. Clothes gone. He served us breakfast an hour ago, but now he looked at Victoria, then at his father. He's vanished. Victoria went rigid. He couldn't have gotten far, not without help. Edmund turned to the nearest servant, searched the estate, every room, every shed. Now, servants scattered like startled birds. Minutes later, one of the stable hands returned with a trembling voice. Sir, there was a carriage. Came to the back entrance just after dawn. Thought it was a delivery, but what? Edmund demanded. The carriage had the Dalton family stripe on it, sir. Dalton? Edmund felt rage shoot through him. That bastard, he hissed. He didn't wait for my answer. He took him. But Edmund Harrington was wrong. Jacob Dalton was home grieving his son. Too broken to think of schemes, too shattered to take anything from anyone. The carriage belonged to the Daltons. But Dalton didn't send it. Someone else did. Someone who had been playing all three. Families like pieces on a board. Someone who already had Marcus. Someone hidden, a ghost behind every move by the time Edmund. Victoria and Charles realized the truth that Marcus had not run away, but had been taken. The young man was already 10 miles outside Memphis in a carriage with someone who knew every secret, every vulnerability, every crime. Someone who had been watching these wealthy families for months. Someone who knew how to break them. Someone they had underestimated. The real game begins as the sun rose over Memphis. 3 powerful families found themselves exposed, terrified, and utterly lost. Their greatest threat was not Marcus. Their greatest threat was the person who had taken him. The one who understood the chain that connected all their sins, and that person had just made. Their first move, the identities, the motives, the revenge behind this abduction, would dismantle Memphis society one piece at a time. The carriage moved swiftly through the winter countryside, wheels cutting through frozen mud as dawn painted the sky in pale streaks. Inside it, Marcus sat silently, hands folded, posture steady, eyes distant. He did not look frightened. He did not look confused. He looked like a man who knew this moment was coming, because he did. Across from him sat a woman wrapped in a dark traveling cloak, her face half hidden in the dim light. She had sharp, intelligent eyes and a firmness in her jaw that suggested she had outlived more sorrow than most people could imagine for a long time. Neither spoke. Finally, the woman broke the silence. You're thinking about them, she said, Marcus. Didn't answer at first. His gaze lifted to the frost-covered fields outside. I'm thinking, he said quietly, about how predictable they are. The woman allowed herself a small, mirthless smile. Men like Harrington, Dalton, Cavendish, they believe secrets belong only to them, she said. They never imagined someone else might be watching. Marcus finally turned his eyes to her, and they certainly never imagined someone might be smarter. 15 miles from Memphis an hour later, the carriage rolled up to the gates of an abandoned plantation, a once grand estate now reclaimed by vines and rot. The main house leaned slightly, its windows boarded, its fields long dead. But inside, the place was far from abandoned. 3 people were already waiting. A young man with ink-stained fingers. A middle-aged woman who moved with the quiet discipline of someone who had lived through war. And an older man with a scar across his chin, carrying a rifle with casual familiarity. All 3 bowed slightly when Marcus stepped out of the carriage. Welcome home. The scarred man said, Not home, Marcus replied. Just a stop on. The way. Then he turned to the cloaked woman and met her eyes fully. Mother. She stepped forward and cupped his face with both hands. My son. Elenina Thornton whispered, her voice trembling for the first time. You survived longer than I dared hope. Marcus leaned into her palms, eyes closing for one brief, fragile moment. I told you I would. The war room inside the plantation house, the parlor had been turned into a command center. Maps, ledgers, stacks of copied documents, correspondence tied with string. Lists of names, slavers, bankers, politicians, investors. Each sheet of paper represented a crime, a scandal, a vulnerability. The sins of Memphis laid bare. Elenina nodded toward the documents as her allies prepared and lit the lanterns. We have everything we need, she said calmly. Proof of illegal slave purchases, fraudulent land deals, hidden debts, criminal shipments, bribes to judges and city officials. Marcus studied the piles without blinking. How long have you been gathering this? Nearly a year, she replied, since the day I discovered you were still alive. The room grew silent. Marcus's voice was soft. I knew you'd come. Elenina closed her eyes briefly. I failed you once, Marcus. Her voice cracked. Never again. Why the families fell so quickly, Marcus moved through the room, picking up papers, reading details he had discreetly gathered from inside the Harrington home. Names, dates, transactions. Every small piece he had memorized was now part of a larger puzzle. You used my time in their house, he murmured. Yes, Elenina said. Every conversation you overheard, every letter you handled, every inconsistency you noticed. All of it helped us map how these men built their fortunes on broken lies. She stepped forward, and with their greed, we let them destroy each other? Marcus raised a brow. The fire? I arranged that, the older rifle-carrying man answered. Not to kill Cavendish, just to ruin his accounts. And distract him. The Dalton boy? Marcus asked quietly. Silence. Lenin met his eyes. That was not us. She said, sometimes guilt kills faster than any weapon. Marcus nodded slowly. His mother continued. But the timing helped. Dalton's grief made him reckless. Cavendish's burns made him desperate. Harrington's guilt made him pliable. She touched the stack of sealed envelopes. We didn't need to destroy them. We just needed them to destroy themselves. Marcus questions everything later, after the others left the room. Marcus and Elenina sat alone in the flickering lantern light. Mother, Marcus said softly, what happens now? Elenina's face grew serious, the calm of a general before her final move. We wait for their choices. You think they will comply? Dalton will, she said. His soul is already broken. And Cavendish? He will resist, which means he will fall. Marcus let out a slow breath. And Edmund Harrington? Elenina paused. He is the one man who might bend instead of break. Marcus looked down at his hands. He was not cruel to me. No, she agreed. But he bought you, and he kept you. That is enough. Marcus nodded. But his silence afterward said more than words ever could. Back in Memphis, while Marcus and Elenina prepared their final moves, the Harrington estate fell into chaos. Guards were hired. Rooms were searched. The staff whispered of ghosts. Charles couldn't sleep. Pacing the halls with the fear of a man who had stared into the abyss. Edmund hardened himself behind his study doors. Papers scattered before him, calculating costs. Consequences? Escape routes. And Victoria Cavendish? She sharpened her rage into a weapon. The city buzzed with rumors, none of them close to the truth. The calm before the hammer falls. On the third night after Marcus disappeared, a courier arrived at the Harrington door. A simple envelope, unsealed, no signature. Charles brought it to his father. Edmund opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single slip paper with one line written in elegant handwriting. The time for choices is approaching. Prepare your conscience. No name, but they knew who it came from. It was a warning, a countdown, a promise. Marcus Thornton and his mother were not running. They were coming. And Memphis was about to learn what real accountability looked like. The letters arrived at dawn, delivered by anonymous couriers who knocked once and vanished before any servant could question them. Their arrival sent a tremor through the already splintering elite of Memphis, each envelope carrying the weight of a noose. Edmund Harrington was the first to open his hands trembling as if the paper itself were alive. The contents were brutal in their simplicity, demands that would dismantle his wealth, his reputation, his place in society. Free every enslaved person under his roof. Provide them with funds and proper documentation, resign from his banking boards, and step down from positions of influence. It was not a request, it was a sentence. His heart pounded as he read it again, barely able to take in the magnitude of what was being stripped from him. For a long moment, Edmund sat in the dim light of his study, staring at the words with the hollow recognition that life as he knew it had ended. Across the city, Jacob Dalton slumped in his office chair, staring at his own letter with the eyes of a man fatally wounded but still breathing. His instructions were different but no less devastating. He was to write a notarized confession of his role in illegally trafficking Marcus Thornton and pay $15,000 into a fund for assisting formerly enslaved people. Dalton's lips trembled as he read the figure. He had the money barely, but to surrender it would cripple him. Worse, the confession would be end of any life he had built in Memphis. Shame, guilt, and the fresh grief of losing his son choked him, squeezing his breath until he felt his chest might cave in. In that moment, he understood that Elenina Thornton had found the perfect blade, not violence. Not scandal, but the weight of their own sins turned inward. Jacob Dalton's letter did not demand death, but it offered it as an escape. And somewhere in his hollowed heart, he knew he was already choosing it. Victoria Cavendish read her letter standing beside her husband's sickbed, her fists curling tighter with every sentence. The demands were a calculated humiliation. Sell all remaining business assets. Build a school for formerly enslaved children with the proceeds. Send apologies and restitution to families Richard had cheated. And withdraw permanently from all elite organizations. To Victoria, it wasn't justice, it was annihilation. Her social power, her authority, her standing in Charleston and Memphis would vanish in an instant. She looked at her husband, still, recovering from burns, his face haggard and eyes bloodshot with fear. The weakness she saw in him only deepened her fury. She absolutely refused, to let their lives be dictated by a woman she considered beneath them. Victoria folded the letter with a calmness that belied the storm inside her. Revenge now lit her blood. She would not submit. She would fight and crush whoever dared threaten her family, while the city's elite spiraled into fear and defiance. Charles Harrington watched his father break. Edmund was not a man who wept. He was iron, discipline, ambition. But now, reading the letter by lamplight, Charles saw the tears form and fall silently down his father's face. A lifetime of pride collapsing in minutes. Charles wanted to speak, to offer comfort, to propose solutions, but the words stuck in his throat. Because he too knew the truth. Elenina Thornton had not demanded anything impossible. She had demanded justice. And for the first time, Charles felt the crushing weight of what they had done, not only to Marcus, but to countless people their business had touched. The Harrington family's wealth had been built on bones and blood. Now the bill had come. Dewdot throughout Memphis, gossip swirled half-truths, speculations, whispered fears, but no one knew the real reason three powerful families suddenly looked like wounded animals. Their secrets were being torn open silently, surgically, without a single word spoken in public. And yet, the true storm had not yet broken. The letters were merely warnings, the first crack before the foundation collapsed. In the dark corners of the abandoned plantation, Elenina Thornton lit a single candle and placed her remaining evidence beside it. The next phase, the decisive one, was already in motion. The city would not be prepared for what came next. In these fragile hours. Destiny shifted. Edmund wavered on the edge of surrender. Dalton wrestled with despair that had carved deep hollows beneath his eyes. Victoria sharpened her hatred into a weapon she intended to wield without hesitation. And in the quiet between these decisions, the fate of Memphis trembled, caught between retribution, redemption, and ruin. Jacob Dalton was the first to fall. 2 days after receiving Elenina Thornton's letter, his household awoke to a silence so heavy it felt wrong. The fire in his study had burned to cold ash. The brandy glass sat untouched on his desk, and Dalton himself hung from a ceiling beam, his body swaying gently, as if death had finally allowed him the peace life never had. The note pinned to. His chest was brutally short. I cannot live with what I have done. Those 7 words carried the weight of a lifetime of greed, guilt, and sins he could no longer outrun. When the physician arrived, he announced the death as suicide. But the city whispered. People spoke of curses, of divine judgment, of ghosts that remembered injustice. And as Dalton's body was carried from the house, Memphis felt something shift, a cold shudder passing through its streets. News of Dalton's death reached the Cavendish estate by noon, and Victoria read it not with sorrow, but with a tightening. Of her jaw, she recognized the message. Evelina Thornton had removed one opponent without lifting a hand. Dalton's guilt had been the weapon. Victoria understood that if she hesitated now, she and Richard would be next. Her husband was too. Weak, too frightened, too injured to act. So she acted for both of them. She gathered men private investigators, hunters, criminals whose skills were bought in cash rather than reputation. The instructions she gave them were simple and cold. Find Evelina Thornton. Find her son. Bring me everything she has. These men were not subtle. They asked questions openly, followed trails too loudly, and frightened the wrong people. In doing so, they revealed their desperation, and desperation was something the Thornton network had anticipated from the beginning. Charles Harrington, meanwhile, found himself trapped in a limbo of doubt and fear. Dalton's suicide left him shaken in a way he hadn't expected. He had seen death before accidents in warehouses, sick workers, the brutality inherent in the slave markets, but this felt different. This was not the death of a poor man or a stranger. This was the death of a man whose wealth and power had shielded him his entire life. A man undone not by enemies, but by conscience. For the first time, Charles wondered if his father was next. If he himself might one day crumble beneath the weight of the same guilt that had destroyed Dalton. He found himself wandering the halls of the Harrington estate late into the night, unable to sleep, unable to shake Marcus's steady gaze from his mind. Edmund Harrington was unraveling too. The threats in Evelina's letter echoed in his head with every waking moment. He saw his reputation in ashes, his legacy in ruins, his fortune scattered. Yet, beneath the fear, something else stirred, a shame he had kept buried for decades. Edmund had always justified his actions by calling them business. But Dalton's death forced him to look at himself in a mirror he'd avoided. He began drafting the papers to free his enslaved workers, hesitating only when he imagined the humiliation that would follow. Still, he knew surrender was the only path that didn't end in ruin. Every fiber of his pride fought against it, but the alternative was annihilation. Victoria Cavendish, however, chose annihilation over submission. Her hired men returned after 2 days, battered, shaken, and terrified. They had tracked Marcus and Evelina to the outskirts of the city, but someone had stopped them. One man was found unconscious in a ditch. Another claimed he'd been followed by a shadow he could not see. A third refused to speak at all, muttering that the plantation house wasn't empty and that forces beyond his comprehension had intervened. Victoria dismissed their fear as cowardice and paid them anyway, though her frustration grew sharper. She believed Harrington was weakening, believed Dalton's death had given her an opening. She still clung to the illusion that she could control the outcome. Her pride had become her blindfold. By the end of the week, the city simmered with tension. Dalton's funeral drew crowds. Cavendish limped through his affairs grimly, his injuries worsening. And the Harrington estate felt like a fortress preparing for siege. Beneath all of it, Evelina Thornton waited silently, watching, calculating. She knew fear was spreading through the wealthy families. She knew guilt was eating Edmund alive. She knew Victoria was spiraling into rage that would soon consume her. And she knew Marcus, her son, had become the key to unraveling not just one crime, but an entire system of corruption that stretched far beyond Memphis. The pieces had begun to fall, precisely as she intended. Only one final confrontation remained, one that would decide the fate of Edmund Harrington. The Cavendish line and the legacy of a woman determined to reclaim her son and expose the empire built on suffering. The cold in Memphis felt unusually merciless that morning, as if the city itself had paused its breathing, waiting for an unseen verdict to fall. Marcus and his mother, Evelina Thornton, stood at a small station far outside the city, wrapped in a pale winter fog. They carried only 2 small bags, a handful of documents, and all the evidence of crimes, truths, and vengeance they had gathered over the past month. There was no fear on their faces, only a quiet, steely calm, as if they were about to turn the last page of a story they themselves had written. Meanwhile, on the other side of Memphis, chaos rippled through the Harrington estate. Edmund Harrington sat alone in his study, staring at the letter that had rewritten everything. His hands trembled, though his decision was firm. For the first time in his life, he was about to take a step that shattered his social power, his reputation, and the entire legacy his ancestors had built. But perhaps in that shattering, a new man was finally being born. When the household slaves received their freedom papers, their eyes flickered between disbelief and a hollow uncertainty. A few asked, voices shaking, "Is this some kind of trick?" But Edmund simply replied, "You deserve freedom not because I'm noble, but because I was wrong." The words were so unfamiliar that the people he addressed didn't know how to react. But the air in the house changed. For the first time, true human silence filled the halls, the kind that only appears when oppression finally loosens its grip. Charles Harrington, torn between heart and heritage, stood by his bedroom window, staring at the open yard. He saw Marcus, for who he truly was, someone trapped in the darkest corners of a corrupt system, yet still holding on to his dignity. A strange emptiness settled in Charles's chest, as if Marcus's departure had quietly closed a door in his life. He didn't realize he needed to open. Back at the railway station, a distant whistle echoed across the frozen platform. Elenina turned to her son, the young man the world had tried to enslave. Break, sell, hide, and erase through forged paper and false histories. But now he was about to claim a life that belonged to him. "Are you ready, Marcus?" Marcus gave her a faint, steady smile. "I'd been ready since the day they tried to own me." The train's roar grew louder. The platform grew colder. Elenina squeezed his hand. For a moment, everything froze, the air, the distant noise, the weight of the past. And then the train arrived. As they reached the carriage door, Marcus turned once more, looking back toward Memphis, the city where his life had once been auctioned like a commodity. There was no hatred in his eyes, no bitterness, only a firm, unyielding resolve. He knew this story was never just his. It belonged to thousands, and now he wanted to fight for all of them. The train bell rang. Marcus and Elenina stepped. Inside, the doors closed, and the train carried them away from Memphis toward a new world. Behind them, only hollow mansions remained. The Dalton home now stood silent and empty. The Cavendish fortune had burned to ashes, their once proud name. Reduced to gossip and mockery, the Harrington family survived, respectable but wounded, a living reminder of a broken system and its consequences. As for Marcus Thornton, his name faded in historical records, as the names of freed wanderers often do. Yet in a Boston library, at an abolitionist gathering, or in a quiet underground railroad safe house, people sometimes saw a tall, calm man, with gray-green eyes explaining the law with quiet authority, and they whispered, he came from some distant city, carrying a secret from another life, a secret only Memphis knew, a secret Memphis would forever keep, a secret that toppled 3 powerful families and transformed one man. This was the true ending of the Memphis Enigma, complete, final, all within Chapter 8.